Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Psychology and Spirituality, a Bridge to a Better Life discussion. Please note that this program, the Psychology and Spirituality Weekly Talks, are based on the works by Joanna de Angelis, and we're here, right, Peter, to have this space for us to just expand our concepts from a psychological lens and spiritual ideas so that we can get maybe additional insights and tips on how to have a better life. But my name is Marcia Trajano, and I'm here with Peter Hayes in this conversation about anger. Hi, Peter. How you doing?
Fine, Marcia. How are you doing? It's great to be
I
here.
Yes, it's good to see you. But Peter, when we think about it, anger, as described by Joanna de Angelis, is a destructive emotion. So we can break down destructive and emotion. We're not right now, but she calls this, right, a destructive emotion that can cause a rupture in one's inner peace, right?
Yes.
So if we were to talk about root causes, she points very high level that the reasons that we have these type of emotions often come from frustration, our expectations, right, are not met, how our egos are just not happy, they're injured, or even, which we can talk about later today, the notion that there is a lack of equilibrium, or what I mean by that is there's some sort of perceived injustice. I'm a victim, you caused me harm, therefore I can get angry at you. So I wanted to say, everyone here today, that this conversation today is just an invitation for all of us to understand a little bit better about anger, and also the realization, right, Peter, that if this emotional response is uncontrolled, it does impair, and this is the hardest thing, it does impair our judgment. It can really cloud our reasoning and often leads to some sort of impulsive, destructive action.
Yes.
I have a vision of somebody who's very, very dear to me. I have to say it, very, very dear, an older lady. And she was so angry one day, Peter, that she just, and she threw a cup of her favorite china that came from generations before. And she just threw it. And of course, it broke it into pieces. And then she had to deal with not only the anger, the outburst, the triggers, but also the impact of that destructive action. But I was thinking also, um, there is a quote by Carl Gustav Jung, our favorite psychotherapist, but Jung says the following: a man who has not passed through the inferno of his passions has never overcome them. Of course, he's talking about shadow work, etc. But if we reflect upon those words, we could say, we, you and I, right, Peter, but all of us here today,
Right.
we may be very brave and honest to say we do not possess or own our emotions. Our emotions often possess us. There are so many people who are angry, and they're angry all the time. And as such, they're reckless. They are unable to manage or even control the emotions. They react to tiny triggers or enormous triggers in ways that, like this older woman, regretted profoundly after that. So, Peter, as we pause to answer the question of why are we so angry all the time, I just want to say thank you for being here, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on this topic.
I remember years ago,
Hmm.
put to me this way. by if we go back to our ancestry, to the time of cave people,
Yeah.
when someone back then, one of us, got angry, usually the first impulse was to just kill somebody. But it was put to me that evolution has tempered those impulses. Well, we could debate that unto itself, couldn't we? But
Largely speaking, yes. Yeah.
if we think of evolution, both biological evolution, physical evolution, and then there's a more recent concept of evolution called memes, which has more to do with, well, social evolution. So, one way or another, evolution has tempered the impulse that many of us might have, where we we still feel angry. Of course, we can get deeply enraged, and some of us get very violent. But at the same time, we learn to try to cope with these feelings in other ways. As to what causes anger, gosh, I mean, where does one begin? But one way to start, I would say, and this is something Joanna de Angelis talks about in her book Existential Conflicts, is our egocentric nature has been wounded in some way. Is kind of how she puts it.
It's a big concept, right, Peter? If we just
Mhm.
repeat that for everybody to take a moment to reflect, right? That the egocentric nature, and it's something that we all bring it somehow. But go ahead, Peter.
Well, there's a few things at once, I would say.
Yeah.
When we talk about our egocentric nature, we're talking about the normal process of early childhood development, which, we are only really able to focus on our own needs when we're very small babies, small children. We're not really capable of thinking about how others respond at all. We're only concerned with our own needs. But sometimes anger can be connected to an egocentric impulse that somehow hasn't been worked through. And
Yes, Mr. Jung, Dr. Jung, right? You're right there with Jung.
and but there's another part of this as well, which is that Joanna de Angelis talks about the animal-like impulse that we can have. Of course, we are animals too. We're the only animal that's capable of the level of reflection that we have. But at the same time, she says something interesting. I think it's a good point, which is, in a way, she doesn't say it quite like this, but I think she's implying that our capacity to have reason and intelligence is both a blessing and kind of a curse at the same time.
Yeah.
What I mean by that is, she says that when animals get angry, usually they're angry and aggressive because they're either attacked or they feel under threat or they're hungry.
Yeah.
And once that has been alleviated, they're no longer in danger or they've eaten, then the anger goes away. We, however, are quite capable of staying angry for a long period of time. So it's not just it's some kind of need that's met. But also, if we combine the fact that we're capable of holding on to anger much longer, we carry grudges.
Yeah.
So something within us that hasn't been addressed. But combine that with our intelligence, and it can be kind of a frightening combination. I mean, we can use our intelligence to create better weapons. We can use our intelligence to perpetuate wars.
Yes. So just before, because I think I want to explore that escalation of anger, but before we go there, so don't let me forget, right? But what I find it interesting when you talk about the idea that an animal, once that trigger, whatever that may be, right? The stress, fear, a threat, whatever, is addressed, they go back to normal, right? There is a normalization of whatever that animal may be. But what I find it interesting is if we pause to think about we humans, right? We have a free will, we have self-awareness, and we can indeed manage our anger, such as I'm just thinking out loud here. Oh, self-awareness, which I already said, reflection, right? To understand not only what are our triggers, but what are the patterns or even things that seem to be the root cause for my outburst of anger. And I'm sure you're going to talk about this later, but I'm going to spoil everyone to know the breathing exercises or reframing our thought processes, mindfulness, relaxation techniques, and even clearly communicating your thoughts. For example, this is comes from couples therapy where the two are just right, they're just angry at each other,
Mhm.
and the therapist would say, let's pretend we're the couple here, Peter, and you just get so angry, or I get angry at you, and I should just say, but Peter, I feel so frustrated when you blah blah blah, and
Right.
the when you could be, don't close the door, the fridge door, or when you don't put the dishes away. There's some things are so simple, but because I don't communicate, and this is a relationship, in this case an example of a relationship, right? A couple's relationship, but we do that with everybody. There's some things that just triggers us, but we don't talk about it. So that lack of communication is
Right.
really terrible, and it's so simple, right? And
Right.
the other thing that you said, and I'm just going to repeat somebody that I highly admire, Peter, that I would like to leave it here before we go into that escalations into war, because I think it's a big topic of
Okay.
discussion. But somebody told me, and it was just really, it really resonated to me, was the fact that um, metaphor, we are like a film or a movie.
Mhm.
And just like the animals, there are points in that movie that led to frustration, whatever, and anger, right? And it's up to us to either hold on to that frame, that photo,
Mhm.
as the definition of that person, or say, let go. And now I'm going to go through the whole movie. I want to understand all that that person, the other, is to me, all the good, the bad, and the ugly, all the moments that we work together, that we live together, that we experience things together, that bring more to my relationship and rapport than that single frame. But what we do, right, Peter? We hold on, and I think you mentioned before, to whatever caused that anger, and
Mhm.
that leads to resentment, and can lead forever, all the way to an ulcer that we don't know why it's so hard for my stomach. It's all related. But I'm talking too much today. Sorry for that. Let's go back to why when I interrupted you, because I think you're talking about anger that escalates into larger and larger conflicts, right?
Yeah. I can think of a few things to focus on, but let me
Mhm.
start. Um, I mentioned before that we get angry when we're under threat in some
Yeah.
way. So, speaking of movies, I know we like to talk about movies on this program sometimes.
Uh-huh.
So, okay, I recently saw the movie Saturday Night, which was a movie, a dramatization about the TV show, the comedy show,
Yeah.
Saturday Night Live, and about how chaotic it was to make the first episode. And
I need to see this one. I haven't
well,
watched
I'll
that.
try not to give away too much here, but
No, go right ahead. Go right ahead.
I mentioned this because, okay, the moment of feeling in danger. One of the characters they have from the original Saturday Night Live cast is somebody playing John Belushi.
Yeah.
And root of John Belushi's comedy was often his rage, his kind of explosive behavior. And there's a moment in the movie where they're rehearsing a scene and they're trying to get things ready. And they start to rehearse the film scene between him and Gilda Radner. And
Yeah.
all of a sudden, a lighting truss just drops from the ceiling because it wasn't rigged properly. So a whole truss
Unrelated. Unrelated, right? Yeah.
and could have killed them. John Belushi's reaction is he immediately goes after the lighting guy. Just boom, just lets him have it. And the reason I mention this is because doesn't that happen to us when we're caught off guard? When we're suddenly in danger? You walk down the street and somebody catches you off guard for a moment.
And we personalize, right? It's an attack on me. It was just
Me,
right, a rod that came loose, but we do that so often.
frequently. Anytime we feel attacked in some ways. I mean, there's lots of examples one could think of. So let's imagine for a moment that you and I are a couple, and you get angry at me because I didn't do dishes, for instance. And perhaps unconsciously, I didn't do the dishes because I'm provoking you. But but in any case, let's say you really let me have it. You get really upset. And I think the way you put it before was if you take a more considerate approach, you might say something like, Peter, when you don't do the dishes, I feel frustrated, and
Yes.
kind of put it in those words. Or you just like really blow up at me, maybe even throw something and break it, but there's explosive anger,
Yeah.
that kind of thing. And I might in that moment feel under threat, and also, what do you mean? How dare you respond to me that way? And then I might, react in kind in some way. And that's how these things could escalate.
Yes.
And
Yes.
one thing you mentioned that I think is very true is if we don't have the ability to stop and just slow down and allow ourselves time to process.
Yeah.
Because if we go back to that animal like impulse, cave people, you're angry, you want to kill somebody. There's from the moment you're angry to the moment you want to react to the anger is like this much time, none at all,
Yes. Yes.
right?
And the
But
other is a threat, right? Therefore,
right,
the caveman or cave person as a warrior
correct.
is just doing what he or she's supposed to do, right?
And often I would think in that time period and in that world, the threats were quite real. I mean,
Hmm.
imagine. Um, One of the reasons our species of hominids are the only ones left, and Neanderthals went extinct, I think it was 2 million years ago, was probably they were killed or inbreeding or what have you. I
Yeah.
mean, who knows for sure, but
Hmm.
that's a likely hypothesis. So you can imagine the amount of aggression, not to mention the dangers of hunting and everything else, but just people not knowing how to cohabitate. Eventually, evolution would teach people the benefits of cooperation, but
Yes.
I would imagine that was not a given in the beginning.
Which is a great topic of discussion, by the way, at a different time. The whole notion of when cooperation, collaboration, and altruism at a at the same scale, but at the end of that scale of what we do with each other led to the evolution of mankind. Love the topic,
Yeah,
but let's keep on going.
I think maybe it's not the only reason by any means, but certainly feeling under threat, under
Hmm.
attack, in more subtle ways, being undervalued, as Joanna
Yes.
de Angelis puts it, not being considered.
Yeah.
You know, we think people are trampling on us somehow and things like
Y-
that.
can I just some of the thoughts that came to my mind when you're talking about this escalations, right? And they all, just like the cave person that in true manner was defending its own tribe, right, or clan or family
Right.
from real, not perceived threat. But I keep thinking. Of all the areas of conflict in the world and all the wars, and we're talking about nation against nation, or
Mhm.
even in last century where we had two enormous world wars where the entire world was fighting. But let's maybe think about some of the triggers and when it is, and I'm doing air quote, right? When it is quote unquote a reaction that could have been perceived somehow by one of the parties as, oh, this is okay. And you mentioned something that I find quite interesting, that idea of injustice or reaction to injustice, or let's say oppression, right? So that perception of injustice is can indeed lead to entire wars against people, or civil wars, or even if we think about urban violence, right? That can start with a I'm an activist
Mhm.
and I'm protesting, and now the person that I'm protesting against takes right takes the insult. My protest is an insult, and boom! Next thing we know, there's blood and tears, etc., etc. But through the history of mankind, we can see that. History of injustice and oppression as part of our history, right?
Yeah.
All the way from, I don't know, exploitation such as colonialism, but
Mhm.
closer to our time,
Mhm.
still, despite how much we have evolved, how we still deal with inequality in pay, gender inequality, racial inequality, issues of I don't know, religious intolerance, and there's so much anger if you think about still existing. And the interesting thing, Peter,
Mhm.
as much as I may not live in those circumstances, when we go back to Jung, right? Carl Gustav Jung, and the
Mhm.
theory of the collective unconscious, my anger feeds the anger that exists collectively,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
And vice versa.
Mhm.
But the moment, and I think you're going to talk somehow about it, the moment I start to break the cycle, I am always adding, say, forgiveness into that collective unconscious. But are there other examples, perhaps, that we could talk about it?
Well, one thing I wanted to comment on
Mm,
is Alan Watts, who, the spiritual speaker back in the 60s and so forth,
hmm.
doing a lot of public lectures, made the point that if you have a war over territory,
Yeah.
usually the war ends once the territory has been conquered, kind of thing. And that's certainly been one type of aggression and impetus for having a war.
Yeah.
But then he also points out when you have war over ideological issues, those could go on for a long, long time when it's
And
more of
yeah.
a personal thing.
Yeah,
And
I
when you,
even call it, sorry to interrupt you, maybe those lingering, and this is maybe Shakespearean in essence, right? But those lingering ancestral infighting between families, in the
Yes.
case of Romeo and Juliet, but it could be what is it, Bosnia, and right, the whole. Um, I remember. Um, this is too long ago, but I can see the face of this amazing woman who um, came to the U.S.
Mhm.
right in a political uh, exile, and she talked about it because of the war. She said, which is stuck to me. This has been decades ago when we talked about this, how her children, her boys,
Mhm.
used to play with the neighbors' little kids, and then the war comes and they became enemy.
Mhm. Mhm.
And she said that was the worst thing that could ever happen to anyone, is to know someone that you love, but because of that idealism or nationalism or whatever identity, you change that loving, affectionate relationship that you had into a relationship that is fueled by anger and more, right?
And sometimes going back to egocentric impulses, it's when
Mm-hmm.
we're not really either able or unwilling, whatever the
Yeah,
motive,
yeah,
to see the other person as a fellow human being,
that's right.
tendency to turn them into a caricature of some kind to be despised.
And Nazi, right? Propaganda is a
Mhm.
really strong example of exactly that, where in one case, Jews at the time, but of course it also expanded to artists and
Yes.
other subgroups of people, where they were put into caricature or dehumanized in every aspect, including the idea of extermination, right? I know this is a terrible chapter of our history that
I, I've
still
been to
is.
Auschwitz and I went to Majdanek in Poland, and
Yeah,
one of the obvious things about seeing those places in person was just how calculated and organized it was,
yeah.
rightfully so.
You feel
I
the energy too, don't you, Peter, when you go to those?
impressed
Uh, yeah.
was, um, you know, we were doing some research for a book,
Hmm.
but it was, an incident, an experience where you really saw just how horrific it can be. It goes back to the point I think Joanna de Angelis made about how we not only are capable of carrying a grudge, but we can use our intelligence in very destructive ways to carry it.
Correct. So
And
there's the two polar, right? That impulsive, like that older woman who threw the china. It's like,
right, right,
what were you thinking? Well, she wasn't.
yes,
In the opposite is this very calculated,
mhm,
uh, with the propaganda, with just in so many levels, everything about what happened to the world in the 40s, right,
yeah,
is just terrible, because exactly that it was well calculated, and
mhm,
the outcome by which those activities existed was destruction, right?
yeah. The wars that are more ideological, more
Hmm.
tribal, perhaps
Hmm.
religious in some way,
Hmm.
those types of conflicts can just go on and on
Yeah,
for decades.
yeah,
And again, it can mean a lot of things, but the tendency to refuse to see other people as human beings, or you get to a point where people just don't trust each other anymore.
yeah. And then we counter
Mm.
to all of this with these beautiful words that Joanna echoes of Jesus, right? Which is forgiveness or love your enemy. And
Yeah.
again, another reference that comes to my mind is, of course, Joseph Campbell. I don't know if you're familiar with the works of Joseph Campbell, but as a historian, theologian, and philosopher, he did something amazing, which is simply put, he did like we have comparative for theologians, right? Comparison between religions, as this is different than that because he did the opposite. His study, which is fascinating to me, was how religion A, B, or C are similar, right?
Hmm.
So he brought many philosophical um, uh, goals of religions are similar, but then he brought how Jesus was the ultimate revolutionary
Hmm.
uh, because of how he brought the concept for the first time, according to Joseph Campbell, to all of our history, which is love your neighbor. So, love the neighbor is exactly what we're talking about here in terms of that other tribe that I'm protecting mine against,
Right.
or
Oh,
that warring country that I'm protecting my children against,
mhm,
etc., etc. And Jesus brings and he says, no, you gotta love your neighbor. If somebody, what
yeah.
is that? The one face.
Mhm.
What is the saying?
Oh,
I keep forgetting.
if you, oh gosh, if
You too.
someone slaps you on one side of
Yeah.
the cheek, turn the other
And
cheek.
yeah,
Yeah.
turn the other cheek, which is just are we did he, right? Did Jesus want us to become victims of violence?
Well,
No,
no,
not at all, right? Not at all. But go
don't
ahead.
don't hit back. You know.
Yeah, you stop the cycle. Which another figure that comes to our mind, Peter, is of course, and it's so vivid to me, is the work of Nelson Mandela, right? When he, after 27 years in prison, he comes out, and this is so amazing that he becomes the president of South Africa. But the biggest thing that he had to address was the individuals that were there fighting against apartheid, right, wanted to do a reverse of apartheid and remove, in this case, the white man. I'm just saying this very oversimplistic. And he's like, no, we have to forgive. So the all the you know what I'm talking about, the series of discussions where the person who hurt the other, what it race did not matter in this point, would
Mhm.
have to ask for forgiveness, and the person who was injured would then forgive or not, and those are filmed. And if anyone ever goes to Johannesburg, please do go to the museum where it shows, because it's raw emotion. And
Mhm.
the raw emotion is about violence that is met with um, forgiveness.
Yeah.
And we don't really see that, right? Forgiveness has this more um, feminine emotion, if you will, this very
Yeah.
delicate,
The
right?
eye for an eye type impulse. I mean,
Yeah,
there was a
yeah,
story about that happened to the Amish
yeah.
several years ago, um,
Hmm.
where a gunman went into an Amish community and held a few people hostages, including children, and held them for several hours.
Yeah,
I don't remember all the details, so forgive me, but ultimately he killed some of them, if not all of them.
yeah,
And then the Amish forgave this person publicly.
yeah.
That's how they responded, rather
And
than
it's quite incredible, right? How could you?
yeah.
But that's how you break the shackles, if you will,
When somebody
of
does something that horrible,
yeah,
usually the impulse is it's time to execute them, or something
Yeah.
like that, if
Yeah.
there's
Yeah.
around, and that
Yeah.
kind of revenge and
Yeah. So if you go back into examples of that, right? We started with that sense of injustice, of oppression. You mentioned idealism, sense of identity. We talked a little bit about nationalism, but now we're talking about this, which is the rightfully so, a feeling that I can retaliate an aggression, right? There was some wrongdoing, whatever that may be, and I have the right to retaliate, and this is born out of anger, right? But what about perhaps manipulation? Did you have any opinion in terms of this? Something that gets to me all the time is where we talk about maybe political leaders or powerful individuals. And when we talk about power, the words that the figures that come to my mind are those billionaires of the day that have such wealth and power that
yeah.
they start to manipulate the facts, or there's a little bit of cognitive distortion, but we mortal poor mortals, I'm just
Mhm.
kidding here, the other, we are victims of those manipulations, right?
Right. I think that definitely can make people very angry,
Yeah.
uh,
Yeah.
and it's understandable. I think people have a right to be angry because being manipulated, especially in very sophisticated, subtle ways, it's the
Yeah.
same thing as being the victim of a scam or the victim
Yeah.
of robbery.
Yeah.
We have been something has been taken from us, or we're being maneuvered, and
Yeah.
I think
So
it's
if
that. Yeah, go
Yeah,
ahead.
no, no, I was just going to say, so there's so many other examples of that. But
Mhm,
if we were to perhaps summarize, it's
mhm,
all about anger, which is one of the four basic emotions of human beings, right? Um, but if unmanaged, uncontrolled, can indeed escalate into conflicts, those
mhm.
conflicts that can be, oh, just a family conflict or a neighborhood, a community, but it can escalate in a way that can lead to tragedy, collectively speaking, right? With wars, etc., etc.
I
But
mean, yeah.
mhm,
Well, a couple of things. Before we were talking about how we can use our intelligence and anger
mhm,
in dangerous and destructive ways, but of course, the flip side of that is that we
yeah,
can use our intelligence and our evolutionary progress to
yeah,
learn how to cope with anger in healthier ways. And one thing I
absolutely,
certainly
yeah,
address is it a terrible thing to get angry in the first place? No,
yeah,
I would say
yeah,
no, because getting angry about certain situations helps us to understand a situation. And look, how many social injustices would not have been addressed if it weren't for anger? Now, how
or
you handle that's a different
and the
matter.
expression of anger, right, through activism or whatever. Yeah,
Where does one begin? I mean, think of the civil rights movement. You think there was no
yes,
anger on the part of African Americans? Of course there was.
yeah,
Very
yeah,
justified.
yeah,
And sometimes it got violent, needless to say, but there was also, Martin Luther King is famous for advocating a more peaceful approach.
yeah.
His religious background was one of the things that influenced that. And
Or Mahatma Gandhi, right? I believe Mahatma Gandhi's birthday was just this past week. I think. Anyways, don't quote me on that. But he's such a figure to bring uh, addressing the issue peacefully, right?
address the issue peacefully.
Yeah,
So there's different ways of course of reacting to injustices like that,
yeah, yeah,
social injustices. But
yeah,
so anger does play a role, and it can have healthy impulses. Sometimes, well, let's go back to you and I being a couple for a moment.
yes, sir.
Um, I am not doing
I'm gonna have to call Betty. Betty, this is fiction.
it at the moment. If you want me to do the dishes, and I know you want me to do the dishes, yes, dear,
Yeah,
I'll get to it, I promise. And then I don't do it.
yeah,
I am probably being passive aggressive
that's
and
right.
certainly provoking you. You may need to get angry at me to get me to wake up.
Yeah,
Is that
yeah.
such a terrible thing? Now, throwing it, coming after me with a knife, I would not recommend that. Please,
Yeah,
or exploding, but at
yeah,
least angry enough to fight to not let it go. If you just
yeah,
say, "Oh, it's fine, dear, it's okay," you know, that's another thing Joanna de Angelis talks about, where a lot of minor things may happen to us, slights, times where we're not respected, and they may be minor things that start to build up to something
yeah,
worse.
yeah,
So let's say I don't do the dishes, I don't do a lot of things you want me to do,
yeah,
and you kind of go, okay, that's fine. And then one day you just explode.
yeah. Or disrupt the relationship altogether, right? So some insights that we bring to us from I know you quoted Joanna de Angelis, my favorite book, by the way, Existential Conflicts.
Okay.
She has an entire chapter devoted to anger, right? And some of the aspects that Joanna de Angelis, brings to us for our awareness are this destructive nature, right, of anger,
Mhm.
but at the same time, it is a absolutely normal emotional um, part of our emotional vocabulary to be angry. But
Yes.
what we need to be aware is, again, we mentioned before, its destructive nature. And of course, the other part, which I love it, is perhaps you mentioned here the fact that it is maybe a egoic response to something. So it's very important to have a sense of awareness. This is our emotional intelligence, right? It is our intelligence as
Right.
human beings into looking into, okay, my emotional response to a situation is anger, but why am I really angry? Is it my ego that has been threatened, or is this is a real threat? Right? Are
Yeah.
there any other types of things? There'll be some nuggets that we would like to share with everybody here.
Things that can make us angry or
Yeah, well, just the nuggets from Joanna de Angelis that we could bring to everyone. I say this because we're coming to a time to close our conversation.
just to touch again on something you just mentioned a moment ago. I
Yeah.
don't have the exact quote in front of me, but she basically says that anger's, um, I'm paraphrasing, but she basically says anger is a normal emotion.
Yes.
But when we don't learn how to confront it and be more conscious of it,
Yeah.
that it can become dangerous. She does
Yeah.
not say anger is a terrible, awful thing in all circumstances, but at the same time, she is warning us that we do
Yeah.
need to do our best to learn to understand why something makes us angry and try not to give in to the first impulse that we
Yes.
might normally do. So she
Uh,
mentioned,
yeah, I would say that's the biggest learning that for me, and perhaps we can share with everyone, which is despite the fact that it's a normal emotion, right? For us not to be possessed by those emotions, and instead for us, controlling, managing those emotions. It is a question about how do we understand our feelings, our emotional response to something,
mhm,
and try to look for what is the underlying cause for that emotional response. And it differs. right? It differs from everybody, but I could dare to say that most likely it has to do with our egoic construct, our threat to the masks, our personas that we build and hold on to it so carefully,
Mhm.
or it could be simply a response or mechanism of response mechanism because we are actually emotionally psychologically immature, right? And so maybe we can talk a little bit about it before we close on what do we need in terms of that spiritual emotional psychological maturity to be able to not only recognize anger but use all the tools in our toolbox for managing that well.
I think a big one would be
Mm,
learning to accept the fact that we are just not in control at times, meaning there are things that are happening that
yeah,
we don't have control over.
yeah,
One thing that can perhaps make all of us frustrated and angry is the feeling that we're wasting time on something.
yeah.
Or Joanna de Angelis mentions traffic or cars and aggressive driving, but even just being stuck in traffic and not being able to get where one wants to go, or I'm wasting my time stuck in this situation, or
And incidentally, traffic is the best example to talk about the vulnerability of us. Exactly, and anger is one of the most common reaction to bad traffic, right? But why I feel, Peter, the, the the reason why traffic is such a good example is the fact that it's absolutely a collective system,
right.
right? No matter how good a driver you are
Mhm,
or how careful we are, it
mhm.
is really you are inserted in a collective system, and you have to understand that what I do will impact everybody else and vice versa. So
Right.
it basically it's the greatest example of I can't control. I can't control. And one response to this lack of control is, of course, anger.
And I think, something like being stuck in traffic can be one
Uh-huh.
example of triggering those egocentric impulses.
Yeah.
There, all of these other hundreds of cars be here, prevent me from going where I want to go.
Yeah.
That where, we all just want an open road where we can drive at the speed we want to drive and get there much
Yeah.
sooner, rather than being at the mercy of, this congestion and things
Yeah,
like
and
that.
yeah, and I love it. If I may just take another minute because it's such a good example. But for example, right, it's not an absolute. This is how we all should drive because let's pretend I don't know. It's a Sunday morning. I woke up and it's a beautiful day, and I'm going to visit my best friend, but I'm actually early, and I decide to obey the speed limit,
Mhm.
roll down the windows, just let the air come
Right.
through,
Oh,
put
yeah.
music, and I am zen.
Mm.
Well, my being zen is disrupting the person behind me that is the opposite, right? He or she needs to get to someplace else faster, and here I am, Marcia, driving like everything I have all day, right? Well, that's my time, and I get angry if the other car behind me honks the horn and tries to get me to. So my anger can be a response to, you don't understand, this is a good day for me,
Yeah.
right? So the opposite
Mhm.
is when I am now the other car, and I don't know. Let's put a dramatic example. I know somebody is in the hospital. I need to go there, and this person in front of me is obeying speed limit,
Right.
right? And then there's this whole outburst of anger. So regardless of that, there's always a reason that is egoic. It's my own time, my own feelings that
Mhm.
determine the right or wrong of the situation.
Yeah. I mean, if we're the person in the car
Yeah.
going easily paced and enjoying the moment and all that,
Uh-huh.
person's pushing us,
Yeah.
first projective response might be that this is some impatient, arrogant, entitled person who
Yes.
is violating my space. But
Yeah.
if we're that person in the car who's stuck behind a slow driver,
Yeah.
we may be having an emergency. We're trying to get to the airport and they're invading my space. So it's kind of interesting depending upon the point of view.
It's all about me, right? It's all about what I'm going through,
Right.
and which is literally the ego going against this collective
Yeah.
system.
It's a
But
territorial impulse, by the way. How
yeah,
else
yes.
tread on
Uh,
my space. Yeah.
Yeah, but I wanted to just wrap it up with highlighting the fact that, referencing Nelson Mandela, who's my idol, or Mahatma Gandhi, or Martin Luther King, or any other person that led to dramatic changes, social changes in the world, but they used forgiveness and they used uh, a peace in their vocabulary versus violence, right? But most importantly, I would say, Peter, that we all should be very aware of the incredible role as intelligent beings that we are on knowledge, specifically self-knowledge, self-awareness, and that self-knowledge can include awareness of my own emotion triggers, right? It is the dishes. I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding here. But whatever the trigger may be, let's be aware and see, is it fair or unfair? And if it is something I cannot control, let's talk about it, right? And there's a final thing that I would like to bring it up is the notion of our spiritual well-being, right? That spiritual awareness, the spiritual consciousness, and how for us to really grow in that space, we need to not give in to unmanaged uh, angry responses, right?
And the good news is we do have a lot of resources at our disposal to
Yeah,
learn to temper these impulses or at least channel them in ways that are more positive.
yeah. No,
So,
thank you.
'cause
This is
aggression
this is yeah,
can be channeled in positive ways. But as you said, we need to be aware of it to start with. It helps to,
yes.
mhm.
So anger, natural emotion, right? How we choose to manage it, it's our choice, our free will, and it is the answer to it all. So, big hint here is know thyself, be aware. Just I don't know, start journaling, for example, to understand what are the patterns of behavior or the triggers. Take a pause, reframe your thoughts,
Pay
find healthy response, right? And then we can start looking back like the animals that you started this conversation with, where the anger may be there, but maybe once the source of uh, that angry response is done, then you go back to normal.
and take
But
time to process and try to understand what's going on. And if we don't
yeah,
know how to respond without being angry, it's better to not respond at all.
not the silence is really the recipe here. But we are at the end, and I just want to say to all of you who are here with us, if this is the first time that you're watching this program, please note those are weekly talks based on Joanna de Angelis. We did a lot of references to her book, Existential Conflicts, and we're here to really bring a way for us to better understand things such as anger. And please note that I want to thank the friends from Spiritist Group Love and Light, that Peter is a volunteer there. If you want to know more about that organization, please go to www.loveandlightnj.org, NJ standing for New Jersey. And
Right.
today's program is sponsored by our organizations that have been with us since our inception. They are Mansão do Caminho, the United States Spiritist Federation, the International Spiritist Council, and AMI Brazil. And if you haven't done so, please take a moment to hit subscribe. If you enjoyed this program, tell your friends, tell everyone that may be interested in these types of conversation. Thank you so very much, and I'll see you next time.
Thank you.